The needle pierced my skin, and I felt his fingers tighten around mine. Jake's palm was warm, slightly damp with nervous sweat, but his grip remained steady as the doctor guided the biopsy needle deeper into the suspicious lump that had been discovered just 3 weeks earlier. I remember thinking in that sterile, cold examination room that this was what love looked like, showing up when everything felt uncertain and terrifying. When the results came back positive, when the word cancer fell from the oncologist's lips like a death sentence, Jake kissed my forehead and whispered, "We will get through this together." Those words should have been my anchor. Instead, they became the cruelest lie anyone had ever told me. My name is Rachel, and at 27 years old, I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. The man I thought would become my husband became a ghost instead. But this is not just a story about cancer or abandonment. This is a story about rising from ashes so spectacular that even the man who tried to bury me could not look away. The morning I received my diagnosis, I could not stop shaking. Not from the cold air conditioning in Dr. Peterson's office, but from the absolute terror that coursed through my veins like ice water. Stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma. The word sounded foreign, like a language I had never learned but was now forced to speak fluently. Jake sat beside me, his hand resting on my thigh, as Dr. Peterson explained treatment protocols, survival rates, and the aggressive chemotherapy regimen that would begin within 2 weeks. "The good news," Dr. Peterson said, adjusting his glasses, "is that we caught this relatively early. With proper treatment, your 5-year survival rate is excellent." Excellent. What a strange word to use when discussing the possibility of dying before your 30th birthday. Jake drove me home in silence. I pressed my face against the passenger window, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary Thursday afternoon lives. Walking dogs, pushing strollers, chatting on cell phones, completely unaware that my entire world had just imploded. When we reached my apartment, Jake helped me up the stairs with unusual gentleness, as if I had already become fragile, breakable. That first week, he was everything I needed him to be. He brought me sunflowers, my favorite, and placed them on my kitchen table where I could see them from my bed. He held me while I sobbed into his chest, his shirt becoming damp with tears that seemed endless. He researched treatment centers, printed out articles about nutrition during chemotherapy, and even bought a notebook where he wrote down questions to ask at my next appointment. "We are going to fight this," he said, stroking my hair as we lay in bed. "You are the strongest person I know." For those precious few days, I believed him. I believed we would face this monster together, that our relationship would emerge even stronger on the other side. Jake had been in my life for almost 2 years. We had talked about moving in together, about the possibility of marriage, about the children we might have someday. He knew my coffee order, my irrational fear of butterflies, and the way I liked to be held when I could not fall asleep. He had seen me at my most vulnerable moments, until cancer showed him what vulnerability really looked like. The shift began subtly, like winter creeping in so gradually, you barely notice until you are shivering. His text messages became shorter, less frequent. Where he once sent me good morning messages filled with heart emojis and promises to see me soon, I began receiving simple, "Hope you're feeling okay," responses hours after I had reached out first. When I asked if he wanted to come over for dinner, he would cite work obligations, family commitments, or mysterious plans with friends I had never heard him mention before. "I think I need some space to process all this," he said during one particularly stilted phone conversation. "This is really heavy stuff, Rach." Heavy stuff. As if my cancer diagnosis was an inconvenience we could table until a more convenient time. The night he abandoned me completely remains seared into my memory with photographic clarity. I had just finished my first chemotherapy session that afternoon. The infusion center had been a sterile purgatory of beeping machines and 4 poles, where I sat for 4 hours while poison designed to save my life dripped into my bloodstream. The other patients, mostly women decades older than me, had shared their stories, their encouragement, their warnings about what lay ahead. "Honey," said Eleanor, a 72-year-old grandmother fighting her second bout with ovarian cancer, "you are going to lose more than your hair during this journey. You will lose people you thought would never leave. But the ones who stay? They are your real family." I thought about Eleanor's words as I drove home, exhausted and nauseous, desperate to collapse into Jake's arms and let him remind me that I was more than this disease. I texted him from my car. Just finished chemo. Can you come over? I really need you tonight. The message delivered. Then silence. An hour passed. Then 2. I called his phone and heard the automated message that his voicemail box was full. Strange, since Jake was meticulous about managing his digital communications. I tried texting again. Jake? Are you okay? I am worried. This time, the message showed as delivered but never read. Growing increasingly anxious, I opened Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, all the digital breadcrumbs that modern relationships leave scattered across social media platforms. His profiles had vanished. Not deactivated, not private, but completely gone, as if Jake had never existed at all. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. He had not just left me. He had methodically erased every trace of our connection, blocked every possible avenue of communication, and disappeared from my life as if our 2 years together had been nothing more than a fever dream. I spent that night on my bathroom floor, alternately vomiting from the chemotherapy and sobbing from the betrayal. My reflection in the mirror showed a hollow-eyed stranger with skin already growing pale and thin from the treatment. For the first time since my diagnosis, I understood that I was going to face this battle completely alone. The cruelty of his abandonment was breathtaking in its completeness. Jake had not just left, he had executed a strategic withdrawal that ensured I could not beg, could not demand explanations, could not even say goodbye. He had reduced me to a problem that could be solved by simply pretending I no longer existed. In the weeks that followed, I discovered the true meaning of rock bottom. Chemotherapy ravaged my body with systematic brutality. My hair began falling out in clumps, leaving bald patches that I covered with scarves and baseball caps. My appetite disappeared entirely. Food became something I forced down to prevent further weight loss. The fatigue was unlike anything I had ever experienced, not just tired, but a bone-deep exhaustion that made climbing stairs feel like summiting Mount Everest. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of Jake's abandonment. During the long, sleepless nights when nausea kept me awake, I would replay our entire relationship, searching for signs I had missed, warnings that he was the kind of man who could discard someone he claimed to love the moment they became inconvenient. Had he ever really loved me? Or had he simply loved the easy, carefree version of me? The one who did not require difficult conversations about mortality, who did not need extra support, who did not force him to confront his own fears about sickness and death. My mother flew in from Portland to help during the worst weeks of treatment. She found me one afternoon curled up on my couch, still wearing the same pajamas I had put on 3 days earlier, staring blankly at the television screen. "Sweetheart," she said, settling beside me with the gentle authority only mothers possess, "you cannot let that boy destroy you along with the cancer." I was not enough, I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. Even before I got sick, I was not enough to make him want to stay. My mother took my hands in hers, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. "Listen to me very carefully. That man did not leave because you were not enough. He left because he was not enough. Not strong enough, not brave enough, not loving enough to stand beside someone fighting for their life. His cowardice has nothing to do with your worth." Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild myself from the inside out. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and life-threatening illness. Dr. Sarah Martinez became my lifeline during those darkest months, helping me untangle the complex web of grief I was experiencing. Grief for my old life, grief for my changed body, grief for Jake's betrayal, and grief for the future I had imagined that would never come to pass. Survival is not just about your body healing, Dr. Martinez told me during one particularly difficult session. It is about your spirit learning to trust again. Trust in your own strength. Trust in your capacity to love yourself even when others fail you. I began journaling as part of my therapy, initially just scattered thoughts and feelings that I could not articulate out loud. But gradually, those fragmented entries began forming coherent narratives. I wrote about the morning of my diagnosis, about Jake's initial sweetness and subsequent cruelty, about the surreal experience of losing my hair and watching my body transform into something I barely recognized. Writing became my salvation. When I could not sleep, I wrote. When the fear threatened to overwhelm me, I wrote. When I missed Jake so intensely that it felt like physical pain, I wrote about that too. Not romanticizing what we had shared, but examining it with the clear-eyed honesty that only comes from surviving abandonment. One entry, written 3 months into chemotherapy, captured the essence of what I was learning. The worst thing cancer has taken from me is not my hair, not my energy, not even my sense of safety in my own body. The worst thing cancer took was my faith in someone I loved completely. But perhaps that faith was misplaced from the beginning. Perhaps the real tragedy would have been never discovering that the man I thought would be my partner for life was actually someone who could abandon me the moment I needed him most. As my treatment progressed, something remarkable began happening. The physical act of writing was transforming not just my emotional state, but my entire relationship with my experience. I was no longer just a victim of cancer or Jake's cruelty. I was becoming the author of my own story, someone who could shape narrative meaning from senseless suffering. My hair began growing back during the final months of treatment, coming in darker and curlier than before. My oncologist said this was common, that sometimes chemotherapy changed not just your cellular structure, but your physical appearance in subtle ways. I liked the metaphor. I was emerging from this ordeal as a different person entirely, someone who had been refined by fire. The day I received my final clear scan results, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to turn my journals into a book. Not just for my own healing, but for every person who had ever been abandoned during their most vulnerable moment. For every cancer patient who had discovered that their support system was built on foundations of sand. Writing the manuscript took 8 months. I worked with the discipline of someone who understood that this story needed to be told, not just for my own catharsis, but because somewhere another person was lying on their bathroom floor, sobbing over someone who had chosen to love them only conditionally. I titled the book Beautifully Broken, a survivor's story, and it was not just about cancer. It was about the particular cruelty of being abandoned by someone who promises to love you through sickness and health before you even make those vows. It was about learning to love your own scarred, changed body when the person who once claimed to find you beautiful had decided you were no longer worth fighting for. The book found an agent within 6 weeks of my first query letter. Publishers were interested immediately. Apparently, stories about resilience and survival never go out of style, especially when they are told with unflinching honesty about the human capacity for both cruelty and strength. Beautifully Broken hit bookstore shelves on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 2 years after my final chemotherapy treatment. By Thursday, it had climbed to number 3 on the Amazon bestseller list. By the following week, I was receiving interview requests from major media outlets. The call from Good Morning America came on a rainy Wednesday, while I was grocery shopping. I stood in the cereal aisle, holding my phone with shaking hands as the producer explained that they wanted me to appear as their featured guest to discuss the book and my journey. "We are particularly interested in the relationship aspect of your story," she said. "The way people can disappoint us during our most vulnerable moments, but also how we can find strength we never knew we had." 3 weeks later, I sat in the green room of the GMA studio, getting my makeup touched up by a professional artist who chatted casually about my incredible story, as if discussing the weather. I wore a navy blue dress that I had purchased specifically for this moment. Fitted, elegant, projecting the image of someone who had not just survived, but thrived. The interview itself felt surreal. I watched myself on the monitor as I spoke with practiced eloquence about my diagnosis, my treatment, and yes, about the boyfriend who had vanished the moment things became difficult. I did not mention Jake by name. I had made that decision early in the writing process, understanding that my goal was not revenge but rather honest examination of how people respond to crisis. "You write in your book about being abandoned by someone you trusted completely," said the host, Sarah Chun, leaning forward with genuine compassion in her eyes. "What would you say to other people who have experienced similar betrayals during their most vulnerable moments?" I looked directly into the camera, thinking about all the people who might be watching from hospital beds, from treatment centers, from the couches where they were recovering from surgeries or breakups, or any of the 1,000 ways life can shatter us unexpectedly. I would tell them that other people's inability to show up for you says absolutely nothing about your worth, I said. It reveals their character, not yours. And while being abandoned is incredibly painful, it also shows you who you really are when everything else falls away. Sometimes we discover that we are much stronger than we ever imagined. The interview aired on a Friday morning in November. By that afternoon, my publicist was calling to tell me that book orders had tripled. Social media was exploding with people sharing their own stories of abandonment and survival. The hashtag Beautifully Broken was trending. But the most satisfying response came a week later, in the form of a direct message on Instagram from a girl named Emily. "I bought your book after seeing you on GMA," she wrote. "You are amazing." I could not put it down. My boyfriend mentioned that he dated someone with cancer once who he had to step away from, because it was too much for him to handle. Your story felt really familiar. Your name sounded familiar too. I think you might be her. I stared at the message for a long time before opening the photo she had attached. There she was, a pretty blonde girl who looked maybe 24 or 25, sitting on a familiar brown leather couch, holding my book and smiling at the camera. And there, partially visible in the background, was Jake. The same Jake who had kissed my forehead in the oncologist's office. The same Jake who had promised we would fight cancer together. The same Jake who had blocked me on every platform and disappeared from my life, as if I had never mattered at all. Emily's message continued. "I read the whole book in one sitting. The part where you wrote about how the worst thing cancer took from me was not my health, but my faith in someone I loved made me cry. And then when you said that it also gave you the strength to love yourself louder. I have never read anything more beautiful. You are incredible. And I am so sorry someone treated you that way when you needed them most." I sat in my apartment, holding my phone and laughing until tears ran down my face. Not bitter laughter, but the pure joy of cosmic justice. Jake had moved on. Found himself a sweet girlfriend who probably had no idea what kind of man she was dating. And now she was reading every word I had written about his cowardice, his cruelty, his complete failure as a human being when tested by genuine adversity. The universe had delivered the most perfect revenge I could have ever imagined. I had not sought him out, had not tried to destroy his new relationship, had not even mentioned his name in my book. But somehow, my story had found its way onto his coffee table, into his girlfriend's hands, and undoubtedly into conversations between them that he would have given anything to avoid. I wondered what he had told Emily about me. Had he claimed I was crazy, unstable, that the relationship had ended for reasons having nothing to do with my illness? Had he minimized his role in my abandonment, painted himself as the victim of circumstances beyond his control? It did not matter. Emily had read my words, had connected the dots, had seen through whatever version of events Jake had constructed to protect his own image. She had witnessed, through my writing, exactly who he was when things became difficult. Over the following weeks, I continued to receive messages from readers who had been moved by my story. Many were cancer survivors themselves. Others had experienced different forms of abandonment during their darkest moments. But they all shared a common thread. They had felt less alone after reading about my experience. One message, from a woman named Patricia, particularly moved me. "My husband left me when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I felt so ashamed, like I was somehow responsible for driving him away. Your book helped me understand that his leaving was about his limitations, not mine. Thank you for being brave enough to tell this story." This was why I had written the book. Not for revenge against Jake, but for Patricia and the thousands of people like her who had been made to feel that their illness, their need for support, their humanity in crisis was somehow a burden too great to bear. My publisher scheduled a book tour that took me to dozens of cities across the country. At every stop, the audience was filled with survivors, not just of cancer, but of abandonment, of betrayal, of all the ways people can fail each other when tested. They came to hear someone articulate what they had experienced, but could not find words to express. In Chicago, a woman approached me after my reading with tears in her eyes. "My fiancé left me when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder," she said. "Reading your book made me realize that I dodged a bullet. If he could not handle me at my most vulnerable, he did not deserve me at my strongest." In Seattle, a man told me about his wife leaving him during his recovery from a traumatic brain injury. "I thought it was my fault," he said. "Like I had become someone not worth loving." Your book helped me see that some people are only capable of fair-weather love. These conversations filled me with a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. My pain had been transformed into something that could help others heal. Jake's abandonment, as cruel as it had ultimately led me to discover my own voice and use it to advocate for people who had been discarded during their most desperate moments. 6 months after the book's publication, I received an email from my publicist that made me smile for days. A major network was interested in optioning Beautifully Broken for a television movie. They wanted to tell the story of resilience and survival, focusing particularly on how people can emerge stronger from even the most devastating betrayals. They love the arc of your story, my publicist explained during our phone call. The way you transformed your pain into purpose. The way you found your voice through writing. They think it will inspire a lot of people who have felt discarded or abandoned. I thought about Jake watching that movie, seeing some actress portray the woman he had tried to erase from his life, witnessing the full scope of what his cruelty had set in motion. The thought filled me with satisfaction, but also with something deeper, gratitude. Because without his abandonment, I might never have discovered my own strength. I might have remained someone who needed another person's validation to feel worthy. Someone who defined herself through relationships rather than through her own accomplishments and resilience. Jake had done me a favor, though I doubted he would ever see it that way. He had shown me exactly who he was when tested, had revealed the shallow nature of what I had mistaken for deep love, had forced me to discover reserves of strength I never knew I possessed. The woman who had begged him to come over after her first chemotherapy session, desperate, heartbroken, convinced she was unlovable, no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had learned to love herself loudly, who had transformed her wounds into wisdom, who had built a life so fulfilling that his approval or presence was not just unnecessary but irrelevant. Sometimes, late at night, I would wonder if Jake ever thought about me, if he felt any guilt about his cruelty, any curiosity about whether I had survived, if he had watched my television appearances, or driven past bookstores where my book was displayed in the front window. But mostly, I felt nothing when I thought about him. Not anger, not longing, not even satisfaction. He had become a character in my story rather than the author of my happiness. The power he had once held over my sense of self-worth had been reclaimed and redirected toward building a life that no one could take away from me. Emily sent me one final message 3 months after our initial exchange. I wanted you to know that I ended things with Jake after reading your book. Not because of what he did to you specifically, but because of what it revealed about his character. You probably saved me from discovering his true nature during some future crisis of my own. Thank you for that gift. I read her message while sitting in my new apartment. A beautiful space I had purchased with proceeds from the book, decorated exactly to my own taste without compromise or consultation. Through my window, I could see the city skyline and the river that wound through downtown like a silver ribbon. My phone buzzed with a text from my editor about my next book project, a follow-up exploring the concept of post-traumatic growth and how crisis can catalyze transformation. My calendar was filled with speaking engagements, interviews, and opportunities to share my story with people who needed to hear it. This was the life I had built from the ashes of Jake's abandonment. This was what rising looked like. The man who had ghosted me when I got cancer, who had blocked me on every platform and tried to erase me from his history, could not change channels without risking seeing my face. He could not browse a bookstore without encountering my name. He could not move forward in relationships without the specter of his past cruelty following him. I was living rent-free not just on his television screen, but in his conscience, assuming he had won. Every time he tried to present himself as a good man to a new woman, my story existed as potential evidence to the contrary. Every time he faced a difficult situation in a relationship, he would have to wonder if he had the character to handle it better than he had handled mine. But more importantly, I was living fully in my own life. I had discovered that the love I had been seeking from him had been inside me all along, waiting to be cultivated and cherished. I had learned that survival was not just about making it through treatment, but about refusing to let other people's limitations define my possibilities. The girl who had sat in that oncologist's office, terrified and desperate for someone to hold her hand through the darkness, had become a woman who could hold her own hand. who could walk through any darkness and trust herself to find the light. That transformation was worth more than any relationship that could only survive in perfect conditions. It was worth more than any love that came with expiration dates and escape clauses. Jake had ghosted me when I got cancer, but I had transformed his cruelty into my greatest strength. And every person who read my book, who felt less alone in their own abandonment, who discovered their own capacity for resilience through my words, they were proof that his attempt to diminish me had actually multiplied my impact on the world. The last line of my book read, "Some people love you until it becomes inconvenient. Others discover that inconvenience is where real love begins." I learned to become the latter for myself. And as I sat in my beautiful apartment, surrounded by the life I had built from my own determination and strength, I knew that I had succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined when I was broken on that bathroom floor, mourning a man who was not worth my tears. I had not just survived. I had become beautifully, powerfully, authentically whole. Thank you for watching our story. If this tale of resilience, betrayal, and ultimate triumph touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of survival and transformation. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads, and share this video with anyone who needs to be reminded of their own incredible strength. Remember, you are more powerful than you know, and your story matters. Subscribe now and become part of our community of survivors and thrivers.